If you sprinkled cinnamon on your coffee or oatmeal this morning, there's a 90% chance you didn't just eat cinnamon. What's sitting in almost every American jar labeled cinnamon is the bark of a completely different tree. A different species, a different continent, a different history. And the strangest part, by law, the manufacturer has every right not to tell you. This isn't a conspiracy theory, and it isn't one brand's marketing trick. It's the outcome of a trade war that lasted 400 years and ended with the winner losing its own name. True cinnamon, botanically Cinnamomum verum, Latin for true cinnamon, grows naturally only on the island of Sri Lanka and in a few neighboring parts of southern India. Its story begins long before the word spice meant what it means today. Egyptians were using cinnamon as early as around 2000 BCE, in embalming rituals and as part of sacred oils. The Greeks and Romans burned it as incense in temples and added it to wine. In ancient Rome, cinnamon was so expensive that a kilogram of the spice could rival a kilogram of silver in price. Arab traders, who controlled the supply of cinnamon to Europe for centuries, deliberately invented legends of giant birds that supposedly built nests from cinnamon branches on inaccessible cliffs, of venomous snakes guarding the trees. The less buyers knew about the real source, the harder it was for anyone to break into the monopoly. The secret was never in mythical monsters. The secret was geography. True cinnamon grew on a single island in the Indian Ocean, and nowhere else. But there's another tree in the genus Cinnamomum, one that doesn't grow on an island at all, but on the mainland, mostly in southern China, and later in Indonesia and Vietnam. It's called Cinnamomum cassia, or simply Cassia. Cassia and true cinnamon are cousins, not one faking the other. Both are legitimate spices with their own long history of use, including in traditional Chinese medicine, but they're noticeably different. Cassia bark is thicker, darker, reddish-brown, and curls into a single solid, hard roll. Cinnamomum verum bark is much thinner, its layers rolling over one another like sheets of cigarette paper, and its color is much lighter. The difference was so obvious to those who could afford to choose that a 15th century English book of etiquette explicitly distinguished cinnamon fetcul for lords from cassia for commoners. In other words, 500 years ago, Europe knew perfectly well these weren't the same plant. It's just that, over time, as true cinnamon became scarce outside Sri Lanka while cassia grew across many regions and cost next to nothing, traders started calling cassia simply cinnamon, and nobody much objected. In 1505, a Portuguese fleet under the command of Lourenço de Almeida, by one account, literally blown off course by a storm, ended up near the coast of Sri Lanka. Seeing how valuable the local cinnamon was, the Portuguese quickly turned the accidental discovery into a controlled territory. They forced the local ruler, the King of Kota, to pay an annual tribute of 110 tons of cinnamon. This was an unbearable burden on the island. In the mid-17th century, the Portuguese were pushed out by the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, one of the world's first stock-issuing corporations. The Dutch allied with the Kandyan king Rajasinghe II, and by 1658 had full control over cinnamon extraction. It was under the Dutch that the system became its ugliest. Members of the Salagama caste, including boys as young as 12, were forced to collect cinnamon bark, with quotas that increased with age. Damaging or mistreating the cinnamon groves was punishable by death. In the 1760s, this drove people to a rebellion that lasted several years before the company revised part of its policy. In 1796, during the Napoleonic Wars, the island was seized by the British, who inherited the same monopoly, but it was the British who ultimately buried it. By 1833, Britain had opened the trade to private merchants, and cultivation of cinnamon and its cousin cassia spread to other colonies, from Indonesia to the Caribbean. A spice once worth its weight in silver, one people had died for exclusive access to, gradually turned into an ordinary commodity. True cinnamon still grows almost exclusively in Sri Lanka and part of southern India. The geography hasn't changed. Cassia, meanwhile, is grown on a massive scale in China, Indonesia, and Vietnam, where it's far cheaper and easier to produce. But there's another reason cassia ended up in 9 out of 10 American jars. And it's not about agriculture, it's about law. In the U.S., regulators don't require manufacturers to state which exact botanical species of cinnamon is inside. The word cinnamon can legally mean either Cinnamomum verum or Cinnamomum cassia. Both are perfectly legal under the same name on the package. That's why roughly 90% of the spice sold worldwide simply as cinnamon is actually cassia. If the label doesn't separately say Ceylon or Cinnamomum verum, what you're holding is almost certainly cassia, and no law requires the seller to clarify that. The difference between the two species isn't just bark texture or a legend about lords and commoners, it's also chemistry. Cassia naturally contains far more of a compound called coumarin, the same aromatic compound also found in tonka beans. In large doses, coumarin can stress the liver. Cassia can contain up to 1% coumarin by weight, while true cinnamon contains roughly 0.004%. That's a difference of roughly 250 times. The European Food Safety Authority has set a tolerable daily intake of coumarin at 0.1 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. For an adult weighing around 70 kilograms, that's roughly 7 milligrams a day. A single teaspoon of cassia can contain 18 to 25 milligrams of coumarin, already above the safe daily limit for an adult if eaten every day. The same teaspoon of true cinnamon contains hundreds of times less. For occasional use in cooking, this isn't a reason to panic. One cinnamon roll won't poison you. But for people who add cassia to their oatmeal or coffee daily, or take it as a supplement, the risk accumulates. Clinical reports have documented cases of liver damage from chronic high-dose coumarin intake via cassia. Visually, the difference isn't hard to spot once you know what to look for. True Ceylon cinnamon is made of many thin, soft layers rolled together, resembling a roll of cigarette paper. Its color is light, ranging from beige to golden brown, and the stick crumbles easily. Cassia is a single thick, hard piece of bark rolled into one coarse tube. Its color is darker, reddish-brown, and the stick is hard to break or grind in a regular grinder. With ground powder, it's trickier. Color is still a clue. Ceylon cinnamon is lighter, cassia darker, but the only reliable way to verify what's actually in the package is to look for the word Ceylon or the Latin name Cinnamomum verum on the label. Even that isn't a 100% guarantee, though. Studies of commercial samples have found that a significant share of products labeled Ceylon actually turned out to be blended with cassia. The most reliable proof is a certificate of analysis from the supplier, not the label itself. 400 years ago, entire empires built forts, signed alliances with local kings, and exploited an entire caste of workers for exclusive access to the bark of one specific tree on one specific island. Today, that same bark still grows almost exclusively in that same place, but the law decided that the name mattered more than the species, and let a cheaper relative from another continent carry the same name on every supermarket shelf with no warning on the label. In other words, what's written on the jar was never actually a guarantee of what's inside. Cassia won't hurt you from one cinnamon roll, but next time you pick up a jar of spice and see the word cinnamon on the label, remember, the name doesn't guarantee the species inside. It only means the law allowed it to be called that. If this video changed how you'll look at the spice jar in your own kitchen, leave a like, and tell me in the comments, what other label in your kitchen have you never questioned?